Hello and welcome to the Last Word on Spurs. We hope you're keeping very, very safe and well. Thank you so much for joining us for this special edition of the Last Word on Spurs as we gear up for the return of the Premier League. I know what you're thinking. God, we're coming back very, very soon. We are coming back very, very soon. We hope you've enjoyed this revitalised break for summer. I can tell you I've absolutely loved it. And I wouldn't say I'm counting down the days to Brentford, but it's slowly peeling off on our calendar just to how close
I'm well looking forward to it. Buzzing for the Premier League, Rick. Come on.
Would it be Macca if he's not buzzing for a return of the Premier League? Although we've had 6 weeks off already. Macca, how are you, mate? Enjoy the Christmas special the other day?
Very good, mate. Unbelievable scenes getting home as well. Like absolute scenes. And we're in the Beaver Town, which, by the way, if you don't know, is bang opposite your South Stand. And it started snowing, didn't it? Like right at the beginning of the show. 3 hours later, because I know you were conscious of time, Rick, 3 hours. 3 hours later, it's like a blanket of white stuff out there. I'm driving home back to Oxfordshire. It's taken a while. There's BMWs and Mercedes, right? Because they're mostly rear-wheel drive. They're everywhere. They're fishtailing down the road. They're stuck. It's madness. I drive a 4x4, so I was all right. But yeah, it was a brilliant show and fantastic. A big shout out to obviously all of the panel and all the people that enjoyed him. But massive shout out to Tim Winstone. He was superb when he went.
He was absolutely superb. Well, it only feels right as we're gearing up towards, I know Jason McGovern listening to this now is going to cusp his ears, the upcoming January transfer window. I think many are always intrigued on Last Word on Spurs as to how a transfer works. What is the puzzle behind a transfer? We had this man join us. He's been joining us for the last 2 or 3 years on Last Word on Spurs. He's done some of our post-match analysis shows. He's given us some real financial insight into football in general, in the role that he does generally on like a day-to-day role. We've got the wonderful Adam Osper from the Sports Financial Planners. Ads, lovely to have you back on Last Word on Spurs. You're looking refreshed. Look, you've enjoyed the break from Tottenham. How are you?
Refreshed. I'm sitting here with a jacket on because it's so cold at the minute and I've got the heating on. Refreshed. I've enjoyed the World Cup. I think, I said to you before, I've really enjoyed it. I think once we got over the issues around all the problems of where the World Cup was and the timing. Actually, the football's been amazing. Been some great games. I can't remember enjoying so many games in a World Cup for a long, long time. Just so many really good games, exciting drama. Just obviously a bit gutting about England because I thought we had a good chance of going all the way.
Yeah, I mean, I say.
I agree.
Semi-refreshed for Spurs. We'll see. It could all go to pot on Boxing Day, right? And then I'll be wanting a break again.
It does remind me of when a player is out injured and suddenly, for some reason, their level of expectation seems to creep up and up and up, saying, "No, we're going to come back. This player's going to come back." Yeah. Almost like Tottenham, we forgot about what's happened the last start, or the start of the season, and we're just, I suppose, anticipating what is to come. And of course, we're in the midst of now waiting to find out. Squad-wise, what we've got availability-wise, we know there's a slight concern over Richarlison, so we'll just see how we pan out with that, and I'm sure we'll get updates from Antonio ahead of Spurs' friendly, which we'll be covering here in Last Word on Spurs against Nice of next week. Lee?
Next week, isn't it?
It is next week. It is next week as we gear up for the return. We'll start with you, Lee, and you can give Adam a chance to summarise on what he feels the start of the season has been.
Yeah, I wanted to get Adam's view, if I can, Ad, if that's all right, before we get into the puzzle of the transfer, to ask you about Spurs' start to the season. Rick just mentioned there, forget about the difficult start that we had, but we also had the best ever start to a Premier League season. I think most people actually forgot that. Points-wise, after the first 10, 11 games, I think it was the highest we've ever had in the Premier League. But if it was offered to you, 3 points behind Man City when the season broke for the World Cup, most would have snapped our hands off for that. Topping our Champions League group as well into the last 16. The fact that Arsenal top of the league is a bit painful, but like I said last week, I think we can turn that gap around. Where do you think that we are at? What's your kind of summary, if you like, of the season so far for Spurs?
I think if you think back when the transfer window closed, everyone was mega excited. They thought, right, we're strong. And I remember having this conversation, some people saying we need another striker, not just Richarlison. And I was just like, you know what? We've got 4 strikers. If you include more of 5, what are the chances of 4 of them being injured at the same time? Virtually none. And obviously, that's exactly what happened.
You can't make it up, can you? Only top.
Yeah. And actually, I think, with 3 points behind City, we've qualified for the Champions League. We haven't played well, particularly in a number of games. Actually, I don't think that's true. I think we've played well in the second half in a lot of games. I don't buy into the opinion at all that Conte sets them out to be really defensive in the first half, because in some of the games they've been absolutely appalling, where they couldn't even make 2 passes. And obviously he doesn't go out and say, sit on the edge of your box and kick the ball aimlessly nowhere and don't try to pass to anyone. I just think there is a problem with how we start games for sure. And then I think when we've played the bigger teams, Arsenal away, United away, you can't come back when you go behind to good teams. I think the injury, I think for me, I've said this for a while, the injury to Kulusevski was the absolute most important. He's fundamental to how we play, because he does 2 things. 1, you can give him the ball anywhere and he can carry it. 2, he's unbelievable with the ball. He always makes the right pass and the right decision. And I think the other thing which he does do is when he plays, it means that Emerson doesn't attack. And Emerson has been a massive problem for us
100%.
Because when Richarlison and Son play, they make inward runs and then Emerson ends up on the overlap. But actually, I think the first 5 or 6 games of the season, Emerson was much further back and actually playing okay defensively, because all he was doing was giving the ball to Kulusevski. And then it was just like, right, you don't need to go forward now. So I think having him back will be a massive improvement to the team and how we play and the dynamic of how we play. I also think, people have been really critical of how we've played, but actually, these guys have played so many games at a high level, Champions League, Premier League, Champions League. And you look at the teams that we've played away from home. We've played really hard games, loads of London derbies, big games. And, other big teams have got to play all those games away. So I think when you look at all of that, I think we're in a good position. We've got players back fit and so on. I think the break will be good for Conte, in terms of to reflect on things. And, with the transfer window coming up, bring a couple of in, have an impact like Bentancur and
imagine that
Kulusevski did. So basically, we're winning the league. Is what I'm saying.
100%. I agree. Just quickly pick up before, obviously, Rick. I know you want me to shut up talking, but Ad, I just want to get your view on that kind of Arsenal connection. You mentioned there about big games. We're playing in the Champions League every 3 days. If you look at Liverpool start the season, Champions League. Chelsea start to the season, Champions League. Manchester City start to the season. We're only 3 points behind them, Champions League. Do you think it's a coincidence that the likes of Arsenal are top of the league, and they're doing really well, don't get me wrong, but they're not playing Champions League football? They can rest a lot of their players, if you like, and they have been rotating for the what is it, the Thursday night league, whatever it's called, but the Europa League. So do you think that's had a factor in moving that? And as that competition gets a bit more competitive, should we say, post break, that might change a little bit more as well.
Yeah, I mean that they've been really good. Let's not mess about. They've been really good. But they had no injuries. So actually they've had the ability to then rotate and actually they've had the ability to rotate, in the Europa, because you sort of look at some of the teams they've played, you've not heard of them, and they've literally rotated everybody. So that helps. And as well as that, because they've done quite well in a lot of games, they've been able to take people off early as well, give them a bit of a rest. Look at Kane. I think Kane came off once and he played literally every single game because everybody got injured. So it was impossible to rotate. And like you say, when you play in the Champions League, and we put ourselves in a bit of a position where we had to do well in all the rest of the games. So you almost couldn't rotate at all. Whereas in an ideal world, we've qualified early and then, been able to rotate. So, Jesus is out now, maybe a couple more injuries. It'll be interesting to see when they get a couple more injuries. They don't like playing when it's cold either, Arsenal generally. So this time could be a bit tricky for them.
It will be interesting.
We've got them coming up in a couple of weeks, haven't we?
Yeah,
so,
exactly. Yeah, precisely. It will be interesting to see, Ads, obviously, of course, with the upcoming January window, how that does affect the teams and the business that they may or may not do ahead of January upcoming for us. Now, as I said at the start of the show, we've had the pleasure to welcome you on Last Word On Spurs on a number of occasions. I mean, you specialise in working in the sport and entertainment industry. Your main client bank, including the Premier League footballers, you've got musicians, entertainers, as well as some rugby players and boxers as well. I mean, just for any new listeners and new viewers that we've had subsequently since you've last been on, you able to give us an insight into what you, again, specialise in that industry, and again, the ability is to try and handle some of those real, I would imagine, quite tough characters at times.
Right. So I'm a financial planner. I've been doing my job for about 22 years. For 15 years, I've been working in the sports space. So that sort of built that network of working with agents, clubs, accountants and lawyers who all specialise in that space. And I basically give them financial advice. Most of the introductions that I do come from, the agents and those other professional connections. As well as that, we do work, which I'm going to touch on later, like on a financial education to young sports people, to clubs directly, to like the academies and the under 23s. In terms of, so that's what I do. And basically I help them, plan for the future. And people will always think, oh, right, well, top end Premier League footballers, they've got loads of money. But actually, not all my clients are top end Premier League footballers. They don't all start like that. Some of them are kids, 17, 18 in the lower leagues, or some of them might be championship players, or some of them's, income might have dropped off massively and they might have only had a few years of good earnings. So what you try to do is get them into a position where when they finish football, which, it might only be a 15-year career, and within that 15 years, you might only have really good earnings for 3 or 4 years. And you're trying to actually then build them into a position where they've got enough money at 35, 36, 37 to hopefully help support them for the next 40, 50 years. So everything that they do in their life, financially, personally, is very condensed into a really short space of time. So people think, oh, they earn millions. But, if you're a accountant or a lawyer, you'll earn more money over your career than a footballer would. They just get it in a really condensed period of time. So, do I deal with tricky, how you deal with them is different to how you deal with normal business people. Business, you can manage your diary properly when you're dealing with business people. With sports people, it's on a day-to-day basis, lots of WhatsApp, text, phone calls. Diaries change all the time, depending on who they're playing, what their schedule is, whether they're home, whether they're away, whether they're injured, whether they've played badly and the manager gets them in for a double session. Man City is a really interesting one. Pep gives Man City their schedule for the week after the game on the weekend. So trying to arrange to go to Manchester to see some of the players there is a nightmare, because if they're playing on a Sunday, I'm like messaging them on a Sunday night, what's your schedule this week? Whereas Liverpool, they do their whole month. They have it all sort of nailed out, which is obviously much easier because then you can pretty much plan things. So there's a lot of that. And just how you deal and speak to people is just slightly different to how you might deal with somebody who is a professional person or a business owner.
Fascinating stuff. They didn't want to come back in there before I go and question ads next.
No, I just literally, it fascinates me how much just on that side goes into it that we just don't even think about. We're coming into the January transfer window and obviously talking about that transfer piece, but actually what you do add is amazing. Especially I set up a business recruitment company called Raw Talent years and years ago, and it was about enabling early careers people in professional sales and that sort of stuff in business to come in. So when you're talking about looking after footballers when they're 16, 17, 18 and they're coming in, they don't really know how to utilize that money. And it's not just financial, is it? It's just like that whole plan piece. I find that fascinating. And it's weird when you talk about that condensed bit, we'll just go, oh yeah, they're multimillionaires. But actually over the duration, what was a footballer if they're lucky? What's Modric, 37, is he? It's 33. So
you can if you look at Modric, you can list on your hand how many players have played at the top of the Premier League or the top of their game for 15, 20 years. It's not a lot. Yeah. Most of them have it's a short period of time. The elite do, but it is a short number of people. But there are really, I spoke to a client yesterday, and he's 34 in the final year of his contract. He's playing in League Two now. And he's just done his ACL. He's done all of his knee. So he doesn't know what's going on. And he was 4 or 5 years ago playing for Brentford in the Championship. He was their best player, and he'd agreed a move to a Premier League club. It had been agreed. 2 games to go before the end of the season, someone did a horrible tackle. He broke his leg in 2 places.
Oh, no way.
And that was life changing.
Yeah, completely.
That was like going from X to Premier League money, not the Premier League money now. Yeah. And then that never happened. So it's not always about multi-millionaires. And for him, it's, I'm quite close to him. We spoke on the phone yesterday. I've worked with him for 10 years, and he's sort of like, we're sort of friends, and you feel their pain when they go through these really horrible times. And
human side, isn't it? It's a human side of football, which a lot of, again, especially at Premier League, I think that example is brilliant. Championship or League One, League Two, they're not obviously going to be high earning as much as the top elite footballers. And actually, everybody, as you mentioned earlier, people even in the Premier League are not earning some of the money that is banded about that we all think that they are. You just think, oh, Premier League player, oh, they must be on $100,000 a week. But that's obviously not the case as well, is it? Like they are still a kind of a minority, should we say?
Yeah, look, it's great money. Don't get me wrong. Like, if you're earning 40, 50 grand a week, it's mega money. But what you'll see is the people that are on that money will generally be mid to lower end Premier League players. Therefore, they might have come up from the Championship and been promoted, or they might have done well in their career and now they're in their peak earnings in that 4 to 6 year period. So you have that 4 to 6 year period to try to maximise what they're going to do. That could be buying their family home that they want to live in for the rest of their life, paying off a mortgage. They might have a mortgage over like 5 years. So I see people paying 20, 30, 40 grand a month on a mortgage. And then, all the other things. And then as well as that, you have a wife and maybe children, looking after them and making sure that when you stop playing, you're financially okay.
And also, just to add, with the example you gave earlier, and this can happen at any given moment, if a career-ending injury comes in, or you bust your ACL, I've done mine twice. Not that I'm a professional footballer and ever been good enough to be one, but I understand the injury because I've done it twice. If you bust your ACL, you're done for the season. So what does that mean? Does the club, people talk about players are ruthless, but clubs are also ruthless, right? They can also say, you know what, we're now not going to renew your contract.
I have a client who is playing in the Championship. He's been captain of his team for about 7 or 8 years, and he did his ACL back end of last year. They haven't renewed his contract.
No way.
Yeah, and you're like, and it's like, well, where's the loyalty there? Is there loyalty there? There is that side of things. There is just on the injury side. There's a specific injury called career-ending insurance, which is basically a lump sum payout. Yeah, if your career has to be finished where you can't play football again to get that lump sum payout. If you do have a contract, England or the UK is quite a good place in terms of getting paid continuously. So in Italy, for example, you're only covered for 6 months' salary. Wow. So if you've got a long-term injury, they can terminate the contract or reduce it by 50%. In Germany, you only get paid for 6 weeks by the club. So there's a different insurance you need there. In England, the club continues to pay you effectively. It's sort of 18 months to 2 years, and then they can pay you up if they wanted to.
It might be an obvious question to some people, but does that then mean, like, I know we're getting into the kind of the transfer bit already, but does that then mean when a player is considering a contract for a new club, then all sorts of considerations would be going through their mind, wouldn't they? Because if I think about it, if I was a player with my family, I've got a wife, I've got 3 daughters, all of the things you've just talked about, house, whatever, I'd be thinking, well, hang on, if I go to Italy or if I go to Germany and I get injured, I'm only getting my salary for 6 weeks. Whereas actually in England, I'm getting it paid out type things. That's a consideration, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that is also why, when people talk about loyalty in football, if people always state in football, you might only get one chance to make a move. Not always at the top elite level, but if you are a top end Championship player and you're a striker and you're scoring goals, and a Premier League club comes into you, you've got to go, because what if you get injured? What if you don't hit form next season? The money that you could get could be life changing for you and your family for the rest of your life. If you turn it down now, anything can happen. And I just gave that example. So people expect loyalty, and I understand that on both sides, from a club and a player, but also people need to take a step back and think, you know what, it's a life-changing opportunity potentially. You've got to take these opportunities. People talk about Graham Potter as an example, going from Brighton to Chelsea. It's like these are maybe once in a lifetime opportunities, and you need to, if you're ambitious and financially, you need to look after yourself and think about these things, because they may not come around again.
I think, Ad, this is again a prime example of why we love having you on Last Word On Spurs, because this kind of conversation does not come up for us, unfortunately, on a post-match analysis show. Or I think, again, it gives like an insight into, like I say, when it does come to an upcoming transfer window, it's not just about going from, A to B. There is so much to factor into a transfer, like you've just said there, for a player, for a club, whoever it may be, so many definitive factors. But I'm going to strip it right back, if you don't mind. We are living in a world now where there's substantial media contracts representing the majority of the income for clubs in the biggest European leagues. And in most cases, that kind of dwarfs other commercial revenue. Some clubs, they have exceptionally wealthy owners, even through outright private means or in the shapes of various financial entities, such as hedge funds, private equity, or even national sovereign wealth funds like we've seen. We've obviously Newcastle now being represented by Saudi Arabia to some degree. Now, that often, of course, bolsters the transfer spending in an effort to really fast-track a club to success. You may arguably say Newcastle are going to get there quicker than arguably Chelsea even did under Abramovich by the speed they're going there to some degree. But it does seem still at the moment that the top European sides, such as the Barcelonas, they are still spending really, really big. But UEFA's financial fair play is designed to try and level that playing field where we understand it to be. So a very basic question really to start on this aspect is, where does that money come from, and why are clubs still able to spend millions to sign a player?
So if you look at like PSG and Man City, the Premier League clubs have tried to stop what they did. So with financial fair play, you're meant to sort of work and spend within your means and so on. And what those clubs did was they basically announced massive sponsorship of the stadiums. And what that massive sponsorship of the stadiums allowed them to do was then to spend significantly more money on transfers. And ultimately, it was the owners of the club putting the money into the club in a different way. They've tried to stop that with Newcastle and those large sponsorship deals. But effectively, that's how the money came in. The other way, the TV money. So what you have there is when Sky come in and do these massive deals of X pounds over a number of years, the clubs, what often happens is they forward spend that money. If you're in the Premier League, you gamble. If the Sky deal is a 5-year deal and you're getting, I don't know what the numbers are, 10 billion a year over 5 years, clubs can sort of forward spend that money by borrowing. So you can actually borrow against the TV revenue. And that's where you see clubs getting into trouble in the past, actually, is where maybe a club might gamble on being in the Premier League, spend a load of money. And actually what they've done is they've borrowed the TV money in advance of getting it because it's effectively like a mortgage, spent it badly, got relegated, and then they're in sort of serious financial trouble. So Spurs' model is to try to obviously spend the TV money and then, use it from the money that they generate on match days and so on and work within the business. What other clubs have done in the past, again, is I think Rangers did it years ago, is they borrowed against their season ticket sales, which again, is a very dangerous thing to do if you get into financial trouble. So that's where the money comes from. Most of it is TV, most of it is money that's been put in, most of it is transfer money and revenues that the clubs generate. And Spurs specifically have tried to generate most of their money from the stadium effectively, and sponsorship and other events and so on, because they don't effectively have that money tree of that owner pumping billions in.
I suppose that's where the game changers come from, isn't it? With the new stadium and all that sort of stuff as well. Like, we've got boxing events there. We've got, all of the big music stuff that we've been going on, the entertainment, all that sort of stuff as well. I just want to get Adam, your take on the transfer window. Everyone knows how the mechanics of a transfer window looks like from the outside, but essentially, are you, there's a summer window and a winter window, and ultimately most football clubs will see where they are mid-season and then go again in January to replace injured players or whatever. If they're going to push for the title, hopefully, Spurs fans, or get out of relegation or whatever. Are you a fan of essentially two windows during that season? Are you a fan generally of the transfer window, Adam?
Well, I think if you think back to what it was before, where you could just buy people at any point, I think actually having a window is probably fine. The only thing they probably need to change, which they did try and change and then didn't change, was the date in which it ends in the summer, especially. Because it goes into the season, but it's a problem with Europe and when other, so if they could sort that out, I think it would be fine. I think the January window's fine as well. You know what it is. I don't think there's a problem having a bit of a period of time. We're almost at a point now where there's so much posturing though, like sort of two things happen, don't they? Like loads of deals get done early, and those deals get done early because they've been done already in advance. And it's just sort of finishing those. Or what happens in January especially is everything gets left until the last minute. And people think, oh yeah, everyone's leaving it to the last minute. But often it's a bit like when you buy a house and you're in a chain. The club might say, well, okay, we're going to buy that, but we'll sell you that person. We've got to find a replacement. So they've got to go and trundle off and find their replacement. And then the club above it might have to, and so on. Sorry, I've got a bit of a tickly cough. So eventually there might be, one club where you can give them enough money to that actually they think, okay, we're just going to bank that money and spend it in the summer. And that's almost like the top of your housing chain. And what happens in January, because it's quite condensed, is everyone sort of like rushes around, trying to do these deals late. And then it's the same in the house buying process. If one part of the chain falls through, the whole deal can fall through. And often people are going, especially with Spurs, it's Levy, he's not spending and stuff like that. But, I know of one of the deals in the summer where, it had been agreed with the player, months in advance, but Spurs and the club were haggling over the amount to pay, structure of the deal, who pays interest on the transfer fee, like some really weird, crazy things that you don't think about because you're paying the money over a certain number of years. Is there interest on the payments? Who's paying it? Numbers change. They pull things out. How much is guaranteed up front and how much is in installments based on certain things and so on.
It's interesting. Just on that before we crack on, Rick, is that's the thing that fascinates me the most about kind of putting these transfers together. It's not simply I want to buy, by the way, I do want to buy Bastoni, right? But I want to get Bastoni or Guardiola into the left centre back position. Let's go and put 80 million down to get Guardiola, or 60 million down to get Bastoni, and that offer him only 50 grand, pay him what he wants, whatever it is, and then it's done. Because all them other factors you have to take into consideration when, like you say, when you've got kind of a 4-week window, that process surely can't start on the 1st of January. No. It must have started ages ago, right? So that's why sometimes when one of our own, Jamie from the Daily Hotspur, he put out a tweet about transfer. I can't even remember what it is. There's so many goes out, but it was one guy that we've potentially been looking at since 2019. And I'm like, Paratici and Conte weren't even at the club in 2019. How are we going to sign this guy? Like, they probably don't even like him or want him. Is this fake news? Whatever. But it's so complicated that they probably are having tabs on it for that long, aren't they?
Yeah, you'd have scouts that are looking at players, and then there'll be like a database of players that they're monitoring, and then they probably don't want to do what they did with a few transfers, like where they bought Ndombele and Celso off the back of one good season, but actually you're looking for like consistent performance over a number of years, and then you're monitoring them, seeing how they progress and so on. But they take ages. And the Bastoni one, there were loads of factors in that one. Firstly, he didn't want to leave. Exactly. So you can lump enough money up to somebody where, but frankly, some people don't want to leave where they are. That's a fact. The other one is Inter might have said, well, actually, if he leaves, we only want to buy these 3 players to replace him, and maybe none of them are available. They couldn't afford them. So there's, it's not always, pay the money and it's done. It will be pay the money if you pay stupid money over the top for somebody, but that's not going to happen with Spurs, and it doesn't always happen. It's happening less so now, I think, with financial fair play. City don't necessarily go crazy on transfer fees. So yeah, there's loads of factors involved. Not only the transfer.
To interact with you, City, to be fair, they don't tend to. I mean, I think I remember Kevin De Bruyne was he was sub 70 million, wasn't he, at the time, or 62 million, and I think he was his record transfer fee. Jack Grealish now 100 million, but Jack Grealish was his release clause. So they paid the release clause. Yeah, they paid.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at even Ruben Diaz, brilliant defender, massively expensive. I mean, Alvarez, who I've got you guys talking about in the green room earlier, amazing player. And he's almost been picked up out of the radar. He wasn't £100 million player either, was he? So it's quite interesting.
they sold quite a few. You know, they sold Zinchenko, they sold Sterling, they sold, I think, another player. They sold a couple of others, didn't they, in the summer?
They sold Jesus, didn't they? Of course, Jesus as well.
Yeah, Jesus.
Yeah. So they sold quite a few players to like recoup that money. I'm not. I mean, obviously Chelsea spent a lot of money. I'm not quite sure how, but they sold players as well over years. And also it depends on how you structure the deal. So, you know, often, you know, you might see £100 million transfer, but it could be 25 million up front and then 25 million over the next 3 years. So actually, from a financial fair play point of view, that doesn't go through the books as 100 million. It goes through as like the initial amount. And then you could sell that player over 2 years. And I think people didn't always think that about, you know, Ndombele and Lo Celso as examples with us. What we paid for him, you might have got some transfer money back. And actually, by the time you sell them for half what you paid for them, add in what you've got in loan fees, your loss is only maybe, you know, 25% of what you originally paid for them. So you haven't paid money, but actually on the books, they amortize the value down as a depreciating asset anyway.
Yeah,
I tell you, Adsonny, absolutely fascinating stuff. It really, really is. What we are going to do is we are going to, for our first break of the show, for our listeners on audio, for those that are watching live, and for those that, of course, are tuning in, listening back to this show, we're joined by wonderful Adam Osper from Sports Finance, giving you some injection ahead of the January transfer window into the puzzle behind what makes a transfer. And it's always fascinating stuff bringing Adam on here. I mean, Ad, look, as we've discussed, transfers are now definitely 100% a central component of football. It's almost become a takeover of football in general because of how much people love the transfer window. There's obviously huge fees being exchanged between both clubs, and we know transfers can happen in a variety of different ways. I think what people are maybe keen to know and understand is how and at what point in the process are the respective people, the entities, the representatives paid in the role of a transfer. You able to give us a bit of insight into that?
So in its most simplistic form, you've got one club goes to another club, they agree a fee to buy a player, and then the player's agent then negotiates with the buying club on the contract, and that agent will then get paid. It's normally always based on the contract value, not the transfer fee. You see that these odd occasions. I think you saw it quite a lot with Raiola, who obviously passed away, where he would get specific clauses written in, and you can do that in certain situations in Europe. You can't do that in England, where the agent gets paid on a transfer fee specifically. So then what you would have is, you know, somebody has a contract of, you know, 2.5 million over, per year for 4 years, so 10 million, and then the agent will get paid a percentage of that. Normally it's anywhere between sort of 3 to 5%. And that can get paid, you know, as a lump sum up front, you know, a reduced amount, or it gets paid over the term of the contract. And then the footballer, that goes down as a P11 deal on his pay slip, and he pays the tax on that. Where it becomes complicated, which is what you see more of it, you know, with foreign players, is what you might have a club that says, right, we would like to have, again, you know, let's take Spurs, Kulusevski. So what you might have is Spurs might say, Daniel Levy might say, right, to an agent, go and speak to Juventus on our behalf, because you speak Italian and you know the club and so on. So the agent will go and speak to the club. The club will have an agent that Juventus could have had a club that they then instructed. So then you've got two agents negotiating. The selling club is trying to negotiate the price up. So normally what Juventus would say in that situation is they say, right, we want 25 million for him. Anything you get above that is yours. So because you're basically selling, and that's your bonus, right? So if you get 30 million, you get 5 million because we've got us 25, whatever it might be, so something like that. And then on the flip side, you've got the agent working for Spurs who's trying to get that price down, right? And then they're getting paid accordingly for that. And then they negotiate on behalf of the club with the player agent. So then what you might have is, if you've got a foreign agent, the foreign agent might be a foreign person. So he might have a contact in the UK that he works with on UK transfer deals into the UK. So that's 4 different agents in that deal that I've just spoken about. Yeah, and that can happen.
Fascinating. Yeah. Crazy.
But what's interesting on that then? So just on that example, if we've got the buying club and the selling club both have an agent, they're talking to each other. It could be, I'm being a bit, I suppose, facetious a little bit here, but a bit naughty, but it could be that because the selling club is given the £5 million bonus to say it's Ricky, and the buying club is kind of going to pay, or the agent's fee is going to come based on the length of contract. Adam and Ricky, you two could be talking about what you're getting in order to make that deal happen. Nothing to do with the clubs or the player, which is pretty bad, isn't it?
Yeah, and then you've seen situations before where you've seen Spurs and other clubs walk away from deals because it's there's been too many agents involved wanting too many deals, and that might not be that they're doing anything bad. It could just be that the situation is that there's just loads of people that need paying, and actually you think, well, it's not really worth that because we can get this player on our list and there's only one agent involved, so we're paying millions of pounds less in agency fees. And that doesn't mean, again, this isn't a negative on agents. It's just it's brokers and negotiations, and sometimes it's absolutely fine and sometimes it's necessary because if you take Spurs again, you can't have Daniel Levy, the person negotiating with Juventus, and it could be that Paratici is, and then he has agents because and so on. So it can become complex when there's lots of different people involved.
You've just given us that. No, I agree. It's mad, as you've just kind of given us there the real kind of complexity around what even forms a transfer. And that's why, again, this kind of next point is that, when a club is normally interested in signing a player, you have the representative of that club will go and make an official inquiry to find number one of the players available. Then normally a bid will be lodged. Now, we have seen over the course of the last 20 years or so in the Premier League where players have taken it maybe upon themselves to try and engineer a move. I mean, one that I know still is fascinating for some, of course, is Adam Wingy, where he sat outside the training ground to try and get his move on deadline day. And we've had situations, of course, like Spurs, where Berbatov took a plane unauthorised from Tottenham over to Old Trafford to force a move. I just wonder now, kind of when you look in hindsight, you must have come across times in, obviously, your career as well, where maybe potentially you've had players that have tried to force a move or engineer a move to try and accelerate that process. Are you in favour of that? Can you understand why players would do that, to go outside the normal process?
Yeah, so go back to what I said at the beginning. You got one opportunity, one chance. Take Berbatov as an example. Berbatov was an unbelievable player. He had the opportunity to, obviously I was gutted he left, but he was one of the best players in the Premier League. You've got the opportunity to go to Manchester United under Alex Ferguson, where you're almost guaranteed to win the league or challenge for the league and possibly the Champions League. So it's the absolute pinnacle under one of the greatest managers of all time. I'm not quite sure how old Berbatov was when he left us. He must have been maybe 27, possibly 26, 27. So if you're getting a 4-year deal, that's your career there. You're not going to get that chance again.
Yeah.
You're not going to get that. If you're 27 and Alex Ferguson comes after you and you don't, it's a bit like the Kane situation. It's like, it's now or never. You don't go, you turn down Man United, to stay at Spurs. Martignol got sacked the next season. You're mid-table. You're never going to get a move to Man United again. Or you're thinking, well, actually, this is the chance to play for the best team in the world, or whatever it might be. I've got to make this happen because it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
Can I ask you, just before Lee comes back in there, you just touched upon Harry. I have to ask you that psychologically for Harry, at that time of when Spurs are appointing Nuno, and Harry clearly has got the ambition to want to go to the very top, to win the best honours there are in the game, and City are sniffing. Maybe just to kind of, again, you will share sympathy of a player because obviously where you've been around them, managing them to some degree day-to-day in terms of finances, you'll understand not just the winning of trophies, but also the financial elements to a club like City being linked to a player. Yeah, maybe how difficult is that for a player to refocus themselves in the way Kane has done that at Tottenham when City were looking, they were so strong for him at one point?
I think it depends on the person. I think it depends on the person and the personality. I think it's like anything in life. You've got, in everyone's work, you've got people when things don't go well, they'll sulk and moan about it for months on end. And then you've got people that, well, it's true that it's, I'm one of those people. And then you get people that will just get on with it. They'll say, right, it's done now. Nothing I can do about it. I need to move on. And I think Kane is probably that type of person. I think the Kane situation was handled badly, by his representatives. Frankly, I think when you look at transfers with the agents that I know quite well, nothing that ever gets done doesn't get done, without the approval of the player. and it would have been discussed. That situation was handled badly for whatever reason. But I think I was on this pod at the time. We spoke about it, and I said I totally understood why he wanted to go.
Yeah, you did. You did.
Again, I know we're going off piece, but this conversation is riveting for me, and especially around Kane, because he's now 18 months left on his contract. I think come January. He's said in the past that he's looking for assurances. Especially after that debacle about Nuno and all that stuff that we just talked about. We've obviously got Antonio Conte there, whose contract essentially runs out at the end in June, and we know that we've got the Spurs have got that kind of clause that they can evoke at any time without Conte agreeing to it, because it's already in the contract, so we can get in another year. And again, might be an obvious question, Ad, but does that mean that, in your opinion, from a player's perspective, Kane's looking to see what the landscape looks like now before committing to anything? Or is that ship sailed? Like you talked about the Berbatov thing with Manchester United. Where's Kane going to go? Because he ain't going to City now. Can't see him want to go Man United anyway. Liverpool ain't going to pick him up. Potentially Chelsea. He's no chance of going to Arsenal. So he's in a fantastic club in the Premier League.
Yeah,
right?
I mean...
And then Bayern Munich's not in the Premier League, is it? And then he's not going to beat Shearer's record. So does that mean he's kind of... that ship sailed a little bit?
The bit that I'm not clear on is how important, and I think fans get a bit more caught up on this, about records. When you mentioned Bayern Munich as an example, if you said to Kane, right, you've got a chance to win, the Bundesliga, which everyone can say isn't a great league, but it is a league, and potentially the Champions League, or break Alan Shearer's record, or be Spurs' top goal scorer, he will take that. He will take winning. He's not. I remember having this debate where people were saying, well, he can be a Spurs legend and our greatest ever goal scorer. Okay, he could be Spurs' second greatest ever goal scorer and win the league in the Premier League somewhere. He would rather, that would definitely be a better option for him. So has that ship sailed? I don't know, but I think it's an interesting one. You do wonder whether part of the tying Conte down is linked to tying Kane down, because, like you say, if Conte says, right, I'm signing for like 2 more years, then actually he's bought into Spurs. Everybody knows how much control he has, and therefore Kane might commit. If Conte says, I'm not doing anything until the end of the season and then I'm going to decide again, I think you'll see a similar situation with Kane, frankly. But I do also think, it could be that actually Kane's representatives turn around and say, well, do you know what, Harry, Bayern Munich aren't interested and there's no one in the Prem, so actually, your best option is to stay. It'll be interesting. Actually, somebody said to me, on the weekend, it'll be interesting to see whether not having the success with England and going out of the World Cup, where maybe we thought we could win it, changes his view to want to go. I don't know. That's just what somebody said. Somebody said, look, because he might have thought, I win the World Cup, or great chance of winning it. That's gone now. He may not play in another World Cup. Does that make him say, actually, well, I'm going to try to push harder for club honours somewhere else or here?
It's again fascinating. It's hard because he's 29 now, and he signs a 5-year contract somewhere that takes him up to 34. He's probably one of these players that plays like a Modric, but a handful of maybe up to 36, 37 of Ronaldo type, Messi, whatever. But actually, this is his next big contract, isn't it? Is now, and the club's in a situation where if we let it go any further, you're going to get a situation where he's going to be in the last kind of year of his contract, 6 months, and go, well, I might as well go on a free. And then he's got anywhere that he can go. And then we've lost one of our greatest ever. I mean, he's only 6 goals behind me, so he's going to break that this season. So that will be done. He will be our greatest ever goal scorer. It's just whether he wants to stay in the Premier League to get another 70 odd goals or whatever it end up being to hit Shearer.
Yeah.
Fascinating, mate. Scary, really. But also, do we let that player go and reinvest the money somewhere? Because, Liverpool did that with Coutinho, and we've banged on about that for so many times, and they ended up winning the Champions League and the Premier League and all the cups, won everything, didn't they? So it's very difficult to judge.
Yeah.
Fascinating stuff. Go ahead.
No, I was about to say, I think there's more, when you talk about banking the money that Kane would get, I think we're probably in a sort of position now where actually you don't have to bank that money off him, because we've got enough players in our squad that you could sell to get 100 million in. When you go through like the ones that don't get on, like people like Sanchez and all those types of players.
Yeah, that's true.
You know.
Yeah, that's true.
What is fascinating is I'll try and tie these two into one, and then Lee will ask you about agents. I think it's always a fascinating topic. I mean, I think there's always that kind of that feeling that normally deals are, you say, are done rushed for a reason, for some particular reason. But sometimes, you do find that negotiations are done way in advance of any deal, whether that's January, whether it's the summer. There is that element that I'd be keen to ask you and how you feel those transfers are negotiated in kind of time frame. And then, yeah, from your perspective, do you have a view on the time frame of a transfer? Are they done fairly quickly, or is it all dependent on the situation in that given moment?
It can be, and it can be both basically. I mean, if you look at, Perisic as an example for Spurs, I don't doubt that wasn't done ages before. And that just shows the nonsense that's in the media, because they're like, oh yeah, Conte's going to go on holiday and think things over, and he goes away, and then 5 minutes later he agrees he's staying and Perisic signs. I mean, that was obviously like a complete smokescreen, and then they signed a couple of other players, Basuma and so on. So obviously they would have been ongoing. What you'd probably have is the agent of the player. So this is also where I don't believe, where sometimes you read stuff like Spurs have agreed a fee, but the players turn them down. I don't think that happens, because I think generally the club will know if the player's going to come. You might be negotiating and talking, and then you go, right, forget it, no one's interested, you're not offering enough, and the player doesn't really want to go. But you don't really go hard for a player if without knowing that there's an interest. And I've seen in the past with people I've worked with where a few years ago I saw a client where they'd agreed with the player the deal in May. They'd agreed the contract, and then the clubs did negotiate, and it fell down on deadline day because everybody left it posturing until really late. But both clubs did. So I would say normally the player side of things is almost agreed in principle, and then the clubs will negotiate. And like I said, there are so many different variances to like the negotiation of the transfer. It could be the amount. It could be how much is paid up front. It could be you agree the amount and how much is up front, and then what's the instalments. Are they guaranteed instalments? Are they based on performance? Are they based on winning stuff? Are they paid all in year one? And it's those things that actually sort of that go backwards and forwards. You might email somebody the deal. They might not reply to you for 5 days, as an example, So then you can't do anything, and they reject it. And then you go, okay, let's think about it. We're going to have another board meeting, and so on. And then with the player contract stuff, sort of 80% of the a Premier League contract or football contract is standardised stuff. Then there's just stuff around payments, which is how much they get paid, what's in bonuses, how they're structured. And bonuses can vary on different things. It can be winning things, which are almost standardised, but it could be if you've got a young player going to a club, when the contract's renegotiated, does their money go up over a certain number of appearances? What if they play for England? And lots of different things like that then go into it. And then if there's image rights that's linked to it, that's a completely separate contract. And then you've got to agree that the amount that's going to go in there and all of the information specifically around that image rights deal, sponsorship, opportunities and so on. And then you might have to even get a company set up for that image rights. And there you need a lawyer.
Always, whenever you bring up image rights, we all think, oh, we could have had Dabala.
Yeah. I think I told you about the Dabala one. I'm sure basically his image rights was set up and held by basically his old agent as the sole director and shareholder of the company. So he had no control over it.
Yeah, no, you did tell us that before. Football agent, we talked about these earlier, in terms of the actual role of an agent, representing the general interest of a player, but specifically when it comes to kind of issues around contract negotiations and that type of stuff. You mentioned earlier, Mino Raiola, who's obviously passed, and George Mendes as well, famous examples of football agents. They've kind of reputations of a fast portfolio, famous people, famous footballers, elite footballers. They are the kind of a super agent, if you like, but they do tend to get quite a lot of negative press. Adam, in your view, what's your thoughts on them being involved in the transfers in the world of football? And just touch upon that a little bit more. It's like, because the football agents, it's not just about that negativity side of things, isn't it? They obviously are there to do some really good.
Yeah, and I suppose in the years that I've been working in sport, I've seen the role of an agent change from the old school type of Eric Hall type agents that you hear about to actually some really top professional people. All of the agents that I know and I work with are good professional businessmen. Their job is to look after their client, but there are millions of things outside of a transfer that they do. You might have an 18-year-old kid. Some of them take them to training, help them get boots, help their families out, get them out of trouble if they get into speeding tickets, if they get into trouble with the police, if they have any marital problems, they make sure that there's all of those things that they do.
Houses, all that sort of stuff.
I mean, that's the point where they would actually bring me in to help on that side of things. But then I'm talking to them on that. They'd be involved in the accountant. And so there's all of the stuff that they do off the field. If they've come over from abroad, making sure there's family settled, sometimes if they're foreign, they'll have somebody in the office that helps them with their bills and getting all of those things set up because it's a new country, banking, all of those things. And then what you might have is that player that could then leave you and go to another agent. And you've done all that work for them for like 2 or 3 years, and then they go to another agency. So it is a very cutthroat business, and it can be quite a brutal business. So there's lots of stuff that they do, as well as the negotiation of the contract. And their job is to get the best contract for their players. One of the biggest agents I work with, some of the contracts I've seen are unbelievable. And I'm like, wow. I say to him as a joke, I said, you could probably get me a contract somewhere on good money, because he does a fantastic job. And, Raiola is a great example. His clients adored him, absolutely loved him, all of them. Because he did an amazing job for them. Yes, he would put himself out as the bad guy publicly. But all of these guys loved him because he did a great job.
Just before I hand back to Lee, where does that negative connotation come from, Mads? Do you think it's the clubs that are forcing that down the chain for fans to feel that way, or is it a case, because like you said there, I mean, the players adore some of these agents and super agents out there because they get them to move. They obviously, for them, it's integral to obviously their wealth. Then in later in life, like you look at Ronaldo's career and what he's been able to achieve and earn, and wherever he goes on to next, he's set almost for life, you'd feel. So where did that negative connotation come from for you, Ads?
Well, there are a couple of sides to it. Like any industry, there are some really good people, and then there are some not so good people. So there will be some unprofessional, unscrupulous agents who will be having their best interests at heart and trying to line their own pockets and not think about the player and the club. And you've seen situations where people have, situations where, an agent has sold a house to one of his clients and he's taken a cut. So he's made the player pay more money and he's taken a cut for him. Things like that used to happen in the olden days. So there is that side of things. There's also the side of things that, when you see it now, whenever a player leaves, it's the agent trying to do the move and all of these types of things. And so there's the fan side of it, which is us, which is, oh my God, that agent's taking Kane away from Spurs as an example, and they try to find a fall guy and it's always the agent. But it's interesting, when a club wants rid of you, no one cares about the agent at that point. If the club doesn't want you anymore, you're out the door, and all the fans are like, good riddance to him, he's rubbish. Then it's okay to get rid of them. And then I suppose the other side is, it's the money that they get paid. But everyone's like, well, it should go back into grassroots and so on. But that's the nature of the industry. It's a regulatory point as to how much they get paid for the contract, and it's in there. And the contracts are big numbers because footballers get paid a lot of money. But again, I know some agents that deal in the lower leagues, and they don't earn great money. They're scrapping around trying to earn a living, trying to do a good job. And often you've got other people trying to poach your clients all the time.
Yeah, fascinating stuff, mate. It just brings that kind of that realism to the situation. Like, it's not FIFA, right? You're not playing, FIFA on your PlayStation or whatever, or your other devices are available. Of course, consoles are available, but it is that real life of, what I mean? It's interesting. Yeah. Look, the final hurdles in the deal are the medical for some players, work permit. Medicals or top level clubs are very stringent, carried out training grounds or hospitals around, in the capital cities of where they are. Work permits need players over the age of 16 that can't work or haven't got an EU passport. Lots of different things that we're talking about there. The FA will grant a work permit if a player has paid 75% of competitive games, and FIFA ranked as 70 nations. You've also got all of the things about homegrown players from a club perspective that have got to go into there when we're making the transfer happen. So I suppose where a player's failed a medical or can't agree a work permit and that type of stuff, how mentally damaging, Adam, could that be for a player if they, all of that, it's a little bit like what you said earlier about house chain. You've been in the house chain for months. Yes, we're going to move, and then it falls through.
Yeah,
that's got to have an aspect mentally, isn't it, on the player? No.
Yeah, it's brutal, and I think that's where deadline day is. That's where it's brutal, because sometimes you might have agreed that deal, and then it's like, right, get ready to drive down here for this, and so on, and we'll try and get things done. I know one club that on purpose one window filed the form to the FA at 1 minute past midnight on purpose, and people don't realise those types of things do actually go on with clubs, and it's like sometimes these players, like, they're treated like cart horses, like get in the car, go down the motorway, no, come back now, we've not agreed the fee, and all of those, and it is, and that's why when you talk about the loyalty, you're like, you don't always see that there's no loyalty on both sides in many cases. But I think it comes back to that point about not getting a move. I think ultimately you can complain about it, moan about it, or you've just got to try and get your head down and get on with it. In the same in any type of job, really. But it obviously will affect you if you are being sort of shipped around like that, and that is probably the biggest negative of a transfer window, is that really late stuff where people don't quite know where they are and they are in limbo, and then there's this mad rush to try to get things sorted.
Well, I've got to say, it's a fascinating hour. I mean, I always feel when I come away from a show with you, I learn so much. Totally. And that's why we always feel like we have to get you back. I'm sure you agree, mate. It's been a real fascinating show, this one.
No, it absolutely has. And I think, my final thing, as we go back into the second half, if you like, of the season, obviously rolling into the transfer window, I'm sure you'll notice it's etched in your mind, Rick, when it actually opens. Is it a couple of weeks or so? Having a month to do deals, or the summer previous to line these deals up. Why, and I know you touched on this earlier, Adam, why do we look like we see so many clubs kind of scratching around an hour before deadline? Or is that just the provider of the media, the breaking news at the bottom of your Sky screens, and all of a sudden Tom Barlow might be happy? Do you know what I mean? Like, is it fake? Not fake news, but is it a false way of doing things? Because these have been going on for a while.
I think, like I said, I think it's a combination of like all of it. Some of it is just rubbish, just made up stuff to try to get you to read news feeds and stuff like that. Sometimes you'll have clubs or agents putting stories out there that aren't true in order to try to move something along.
Wow.
So you might say, "Oh, blah blah's interesting," and I think you saw it with the guy that you were obsessed with on this, the striker that went to Juventus. I remember.
Oh yeah, What was, I can't remember his name.
But him specifically, when he signed for Juventus, they said the deal was agreed 4 months ago, and he spoke to nobody else, and we were being pumped him for months. That could have just been somebody using us to try to push out a story to get somebody else to move. So that happens. Sometimes, as I said, you've got the chain, and then sometimes that breaks down, and then something happens really late, so then the whole chain goes back to normal again. Or sometimes people do just leave things to the last minute because they think, right, bang, if we go in now, we'll get him, and we can push this through at a lower price. So I think it's a combination, and then also panic sets in because there is that posturing and negotiating, and then you're like almost like, right, if we don't get this done now, it's never going to happen. We need to move right now.
Just in your opinion, rather than inside knowledge you might have, but you can keep that to yourself, of course. The Kulusevski and Rodrigo Bentancur was done late. There was a lot of rumours about a lot of other players coming in. These two weren't even on our radar, I don't think, until probably 2 days, maybe 3 days before the January transfer window ended. Obviously, they came in and they have been absolutely outstanding. I don't think I've met any Tottenham fan or other pundit of other clubs or whatever that have said, wow, these two are rubbish. They've been brilliant. So firstly, please, Paratici and Mr. Lee,
can
you do it again, please? But equally, do you think that was planned in advance, or a little bit more? Because I didn't feel like it was a panic, but they come out of nowhere almost, didn't they?
Yeah, I reckon, people always say that Paratici has like a couple of people he's negotiating with. So it wouldn't surprise me whether there was like 2 or 3 people that they were negotiating with, and maybe they had people that were more higher up on the list that they would have preferred, but they've negotiated that deal and it's on the table and they're like, right, this isn't happening now. Let's give up on it and get these two guys.
Yeah.
Because again, you've got Juventus, you've got 2 players, you've got 2 player agents. It's not that quick. You've got to do personal terms with both of them and all of those types of things. So I'm sure they would have probably been negotiated that for a long time. And then
That's a good deal as well, wasn't it?
It's a ridiculous deal when you look at it again. I think Bentancur's he's 16 million euros.
15.8 million up front. It's insane, isn't it?
It is absolutely insane. And Kulusevski again, he's 40 or 45 million when we buy him. Again, it's it's that ludicrous transfer fees for how good they both are.
Yeah. Ads, it is always fascinating having you on, Lee. Thank you so much for joining us on this one, mate. It's been a real pleasure. We've got you back with us soon, gearing up towards the start of the resumption of the Premier League. And just to close it with you, I know you've got some news maybe for some viewers and listeners here. I know you've got something very exciting happening for you in the new year. Should we close the show with that very quickly?
Yeah. Okay. I mentioned before we do a lot of financial education. I don't just work in football; I work in sport. So we've been working with a couple of boxers, and we basically put together a financial education program in boxing because they are even underserviced in this space specifically more than football. They've got a much shorter career. You can get knocked out and then your career's over. Your earnings are very erratic. So we've put together a financial education program specifically for boxers, and we spoke to a number of people, and we've just launched with 258 Management, who is Anthony Joshua's management agency, a financial education program that we're doing to them, their boxers, and then we're trying to roll it out in the industry sort of wider with Team GB and so on, hopefully in the future.
Amazing, mate.
Superb. Brilliant.
Brilliant.
Add into the socials, I'm sure people can catch you over at Sports Finance for any questions they may have. Just don't flood the inbox too hard, because I know you've got a very busy day job, right?
Yeah. It's good. Thanks a lot for having me on as always.
Pleasure. Adam, thank you so much. Lee, thank you so much, Bud. We're looking forward to having Adam on back for the season. Guys, please, as always, keep safe, keep well. We're back with you, as always, very, very soon on Last Word on Spurs. Take care. Thank you so much.